We come into our lives with the two greatest gifts of creativity and imagination. It's how we create our life. And we've been dumbed down over thousands of years to not trust our creativity and our imagination. Because if we don't trust that we can create everything, that we can know everything, then that keeps us in a state of confusion. And if we're in a state of confusion, then we rely upon authority, and we don't make good decisions for ourselves. It keeps us on the hamster wheel, right? And it's been that way for a long time. Now, I say, it's the controllers, the bad guys, that created this illusion for us. But we agreed to be a part of this illusion. So there are no bad guys.
I'd like to welcome to the show, Suzanne Spooner. How you doing, Suzanne?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm really looking forward to talking to you, because this is you do part of your practice is this concept, this modality of QHHT, which I get constantly. People, all the people who listen to the show, they message you, oh, QHHT. I'm like, what in God's green earth is QHHT? Like, I have no idea. So I started looking, quantum healing hypnosis tech. Like, what is? So when I started looking for someone who could be an aficionado, if you will, a leader in this space, you kept coming up. So I was like, well, if we're going to talk to somebody, let's bring Suzanne on the show to talk about this.
I'll be happy to talk to you about this. It's fascinating.
So first question before we get started is, how did you first become interested in exploring human consciousness through hypnosis, meditation, and channeling?
Yeah. Well, I would say channeling came first, totally unexpected, completely unexpected. And I developed a process that I eventually was able to show people how they can channel and tap into their own self to receive information from, what some people would call the high self or subconscious, or connect with loved ones that have passed, God, source, whatever name you want to give that. It's infinite, the possibilities. So that happened to me one day in my kitchen, sitting at my table, working on another process that I had learned. And it took me a little while to wrap my head around what this was and how to use it and what it was for. And, a few moments of, am I going crazy? Am I doing what I think I'm doing? And especially once I developed the class, and others started learning it and receiving their own messages, I just thought, wow, this is so cool. And I think what I was on fire about with this technique, it's called the art of universal knowing, or talk, was that it showed that we all hold all answers within us, which is different from what we've been taught. And so when Dolores Cannon came into my purview, I think that's what I gravitated towards, because her hypnosis process, which I had never done, I'd never learned a hypnosis process before. What I loved about it was that it wasn't her or the practitioner giving the client any answers or doing any healing on the body. It was guiding them to this very deep space within them where they could access all knowledge and all healing. And to me, that just, like talk, or the art of universal knowing, it's empowering. It's letting people know how to access this information. And so a few years after I developed talk, that's when Dolores popped up, and in my world. And it actually took a year for me to get settled in with her. I can't remember the first thing she was talking about when she came across my YouTube channel, as she tends to do with a lot of people, was a topic that I just wasn't quite interested in at the time. I think it was ETs. I mean, I was cool with it, but it just wasn't my cup of joe at the moment. But she looked just like my grandma. And my grandma had passed, and I'm like, oh, she looks just like Grandma Nettie. That's so sweet. But she's talking about these really far out topics. I'm like, that's kind of cool. And so I put her away for about a year. And then a year later, I saw another interview of her, and she was talking about one of her, I think it was Convoluted Universe Book 3 at the time. It had just come out. And it was many, many different topics of many different people's experiences while they were in hypnosis. And that just fascinated me. And so, like everybody at the time, I called down to the office. I wanted to have a session with Dolores, and I got on her list. I think it was about 2 or 3 years long wait at the time. But then I discovered that she taught this, and I thought, whoa, that'd be like, I would love to know this information that she's getting. And I'm very curious. And so I signed up for the first class and just hit the ground running with it.
So can you tell, for people who don't know who Dolores is, can you kind of talk a little bit about Dolores and her work?
Oh my gosh, what an amazing lady. She worked in the field of hypnosis, quite starting kind of accidentally. Her husband, when he was in the service, wanted to do hypnosis to help people with habits, smoking, eating, drinking, things like that. While working with, I think it was an officer's wife at the time who wanted to lose weight, that lady spontaneously went into a past life. Dolores was her husband's assistant at the time with the big reels of recording devices and all that they were using at the time, reel to reel. And it sparked a curiosity within her. And not long after that, her husband, Johnny, was in a horrific car accident and became a quadriplegic, I believe. At least couldn't use the legs. And so she had to put everything on hold. And it was quite a while later that she picked up this hypnosis thing. And she was studying different types of hypnosis and all that when she decided to create her own technique. Which is what evolved into Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. And what makes her technique different than other types of regression hypnosis is that not only are the clients going to other lifetimes, if we're talking linear, you could say a past life, but it's not always that. But they're also tapping into this part of themselves that knows flipping everything. And some will call it the high self or subconscious, divine self, superconscious, any name is fine. But that part of them that knows everything. And they come into a session where they have already written up a list of questions that they want to have answered. And these questions can be anything. They usually will fall underneath kind of two categories, one of life and personal questions and one of health and body questions. And so when they come in for a session, they'll sit, we'll talk for a while. They share a bit about their life story. This usually takes a couple of hours, and it's fascinating. And then we take a quick restroom break, come back, they get comfy on a table, however the practitioner has it set up. And they start being guided into this deep state of relaxation or hypnosis. From there, it's amazing, Alex. This part of them that knows everything has picked the lifetime or lifetimes or experiences or stories. If they don't believe in lifetimes, you don't have to. It's just fine. To this story or this lifetime that relates to this current life in this most unexpected and very helpful way. So that's what we explore. We go through that, we'll call it a lifetime. It can be anything, though, because we're everything. And then when we get done looking at that, we'll make this super easy transition over to that part of them that knows everything. And it's amazing to witness. I have the best job in the whole world. And then that's where I'll start asking their list of questions. And that's what I'm really good at. I'm really a good question asker. I learned from the great Dolores Cannon, who was phenomenal at pulling information from people in this deep, deep reservoir of knowledge that we've all had for every second of every life. And so we just have those conversations about the answers to their questions, healing their body. Everybody can. It's not a miracle. It's normal in this experience. And that's what Dolores created.
Wow. So what part of channeling, because from my understanding, she was a channel as well, or am I mistaken?
No, she would not say that she was a channel at all. She would say she was a reporter. She would go into people's deep consciousness to pull out lost and ancient knowledge, and of course, helping them on their own path. But no, she never claimed to channel.
Okay. So then when you started to kind of go down these roads. Like you were saying, when you were in your kitchen and you started like asking yourself, is this happening? Am I going a little nutty? How did you process this? Like a lot of this stuff as a
Yeah.
normal human being who's not, it doesn't sound like your background is this. So this was kind of out of left field, if I'm not mistaken.
I was a real estate agent.
Of course, that makes
And my
sense.
boss would just wish I would have stayed with that nice, normal, real estate job.
Sure.
Yeah, but I've always been curious and open, and I think that helped a lot. And yeah, so when that first happened to me, I'll set the scene just a little bit. I was in my kitchen. I was working on this class that my girlfriends and I were taking with a really sweet teacher named Malavika Shah. It was a spiritual response therapy class. They call it SRT. And it's just, you use a pendulum and a bunch of charts, and you clear out energy, and you can clear out energy from other lifetimes or your house, whatever. So anyways, it was kind of a complicated process, but I was picking it up easier than I thought I would, which was, a nice surprise. And that morning, my kids had gone to school, my husband had gone to work, and I was just practicing when all of a sudden I felt the presence of my father, who had passed many years before. Great guy. He had chosen to end his life. So, of course, very sad. We were very, very close. And we always had just the wildest esoteric conversations before he passed. So, I mean, I just knew in my heart of hearts, if there's a way we could connect, we'd figure it out. And he had always, since his passing, had come to me periodically in very intense dream visits. And I knew they were visits. They weren't just dreams. So we'd had that connection. But this morning, I felt him. I knew he was with me. And I'm just like thinking about, wow, what could I do with this? And that's interesting. And I'm holding this pendulum to do this other clearing work. And I have a yes and a no direction for it. So I asked, it's kind of like I'm obnoxiously optimistic, but I kind of because I didn't want to get my hopes up. And so I just, instead of asking, is my dad here? I said, is there someone here with me? And my yes goes this way with a pendulum. It's kind of opposite of most. And it not only did yes, it was like kinking. It was like going way up. And I'm like, okay, figure this out. And I'm looking through all these SRT charts to figure out a way to communicate, but that's not what this process is all about at all. And so I decided to draw up a letter chart, which I had never in my life used a letter chart before. And my fear came up right away, and I went, I don't want this to be like Ouija, gross, right away. It's like, I was having this dual conversation with both sides of my head, and it says, no, just try it, just see what happens. And I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah, that's what I'll do. I'll just try it. And so I made this really crappy letter chart because I have no artistic ability at all, or symmetry. And but I put the letters around it, and I'm like, okay, let's just roll. And I put the pendulum over the letter chart, and it started pulling to letters that were spelling out words and then sentences. And I'm like, what? It wasn't words I was thinking. And I had paper and pen. I have the message here actually. But so I wrote it down as I went, and then I'd pick the pendulum back up, and it would start where I'd left off just perfectly. Just perfect dictation. And it was this beautiful message. And I just had to go, what just happened here? And was that an anomaly? That's really cool and really weird. And, I'm careful with the words I use because I know words create things. So I didn't say crazy. I just said interesting. And I had to ponder on it for a little while. I sat back down to kind of prove it wouldn't happen again, which again, totally against my nature, because I didn't know what in the heck to do with it if it worked.
Right.
And it did. It was another message, but this time it was from my father, and it was short and sweet. And my heart just felt like I had like this huge heart explosion. My cheeks literally went red. And I'm like, we did it. We figured something out. And so that just started this conversation back and forth. And I'd be thinking in my car about, I wonder, what was it like for him right after he passed? And when I get back home and I could sit and do another message, then this beautiful explanation came out, which was so heart healing because, especially back then, it's 1991, I believe, when he passed. Even at the funeral, people who I know loved me were saying, well, he went to hell because he,
Obviously.
awesome. Thank you. That helps me right now so much.
Jesus.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh my God. The
But that's where these
dogmas.
heads were. They were trying to, just help me.
Just to know he went to hell. But I hope you had a great rest of your day. Like, it's so ridiculous, isn't it? It is so ridiculous. My God.
So ridiculous. And so when he explained to me what it was like right after he passed, he's like, I went and rested for a while. And then I sat with God, and then we talked about my life. And man, it was amazing. But then it was kind of like in the back of my head, there's still more to that story, I think. And it took, I was talking to my girlfriends at the time about what was happening, and they're really curious about these messages. And one of my girlfriends asked me to ask him, I think it was describe transition or something like that. Well, that's when I asked him that I got the rest of the story. Now, of course, he had depression, obviously, and a lot of things that he couldn't process from his life. And he says, when I was resting, there was a place I went before that. And he says, it was hell. And he says, but it was my hell. I created it. I was in full control of that because I felt I wasn't worthy to be anywhere else. And I think, my breath kind of, because that's the last place this sweet soul should ever experience. He was hurting. And he, being the dad, his essence was still the dad. And he says, honey, I didn't stay there long. And then I asked to be with God, and I went right out, and I was in that garden that I told you about where I rested. And then I sat with God. And then a brother-in-law that had passed came through, and I was asking him about what his heaven was like. Kind of a funny ways to phrase it, but that's how it came out. And he says, Susie, everybody creates their own heaven. He goes, you might want to think about what you want your heaven to be like, because it can be anything that you want it to be like. And for him, it was the little tiny town that he grew up in with his, his bike and his freedom and his buddies. And, that's what his was like. And then he mentioned talking to my dad, sometimes I go visit your dad. They were good friends. And I'm like, how do you do that? And he goes, you just do it with a thought. He goes, everything's so much easier here. Everything's with thought. Your dad has a really cool heaven. It's like this little bungalow house, and he's got his 1957 Thunderbird, and that's where he is right now. And so I just think, and we're together, and it's an agreement, and we spend, our time out of time together.
It sounds, it sounds very similar to some of the scenes in What Dreams May Come.
Yeah.
Where he created his own heaven based on the paintings, and he was basically in a walking painting and all this stuff. It was that movie. The more I talk to people about these topics, the more I realize how on the nose a lot of stuff is in that movie.
Well, then let's talk a little bit about creation, right? Because, I love to have this talk because we're waking up from the illusion that we don't have this ability. But, I tell all of my clients that, my QHHT clients, that, we come into our lives with the two greatest gifts of creativity and imagination. Is how we create our life. And we've been dumbed down over thousands of years to not trust our creativity and our imagination. Because if we don't trust that we can create everything, that we can know everything, then that keeps us in a state of confusion. And if we're in a state of confusion, then we rely upon authority, and we don't make good decisions for ourselves. It keeps us on the hamster wheel, right? And it's been that way for a long time. Now, I say, it's the controllers, the bad guys, that created this illusion for us. But we agreed to be a part of this illusion. So there are no bad guys.
Correct.
We are not victims, although we can really do that role super duper well. But in this work of QHHT, where we've seen a huge shift in consciousness, which is like one of my geekiest, happiest things about my job, is I get to watch evolution unfold over these years that I've done this, where we had about 12 years ago and earlier, let's put a time to it. Humanity had bought into the illusion that if you're making it up, it isn't real. And if we believe that, then we don't believe in our creativity and our imagination, because that's our direct connect to source, to God, to our high self, to the part of us that knows everything. So if we believe if we're making it up, it isn't real, then we close down those gifts, right? So when Dolores was doing this work 12 years ago and earlier, before she passed in 2014, it would be a client's natural experience in a QHHT session to not be aware during the session, not have much memory or any memory after the session. You know, Dolores knew to record these sessions, and she taught to record them so that the clients could have them afterwards. So there was just like this, we called it the amnesia state. It's like their left brain politely got up off the table, went down the hall and around the corner, sat in a big comfy chair, and politely waited until it got called back in at the end of the session. It was so easy for the clients and the practitioners at that time because of that. But one of my most favorite parts of my job is I get to hang out with a lot of high selves, and I'm super curious. I want to know everything. So when I started doing this work, it was in 2012. It was right at that time. And this change was happening where clients were starting to feel more aware in the sessions. And it was a really big quandary of like, why aren't they behaving the way they used to with this amnesia state? And so I started asking early on, you know, what's up with this, with the high selves, when I was at the end of a session with a client and we'd answered all their questions, and, you know, I'm just kind of rolling and having this great conversation. And what they said is, no, Suzanne, this is what's going on. This is evolution. This is meant to be. The amnesia days were because everybody had agreed that if you're making it up, it isn't real. So if people would have tried to have woken up and they wanted to try this hypnosis process to find their other lifetimes and these deep answers and great healing that they're capable of doing, if they would have been aware during the sessions at that time, they would have believed they were making it up, it wasn't real, and they would have thrown the baby out with the bathwater. Yeah. So the high cells and source one-upped the bad guys, the controllers, and they took memory away from the experience. So when they would get done with the experience, you know, say Dolores was giving you a session and you came out of it and she'd go, well, you know, you were a blah, 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 and the blah, blah, blah. And they'd be like, and she'd say, yes, here's your cassette tape. Go home and take your cassette tape and listen to it. And they'd be like, whatever. Okay. And they go home and they plug their cassette tape in and they go, oh, I was a blah, blah, blah. And then they call Marge up and they go, Marge, I was a blah, blah, blah. And Marge would go, oh my gosh, I wonder if I was. And it was this beautiful way of waking people up to know somewhere deep inside them, they have this power, this knowledge, these gifts. And so they started to delve into topics more, and the Great Awakening started. You know, it was a way, one of the ways that people started waking up. So what the high selves tell me is that was for that purpose, to help people start waking up. But what they say, and this is like the news flash of the day, is we're all supposed to be like our high selves in a awake and aware physical body, meaning you and I and everybody can tap in at will. You don't need a QHHT session. You can do this all by yourself to find your answers and your understanding and heal yourself. So they say, you couldn't go from full amnesia to fully awake and aware in a blink of an eye. It would have fried your brain. We had to take it in increments. And, you know, here we're going on 12 years, and that's a very short span of time in humanity, but it feels longer. So in that time, what I've gotten to witness is more and more clients are feeling aware during the sessions, although they're still in deeper than they think they are. This is what you have me for, is because I can really judge well where people are at in these levels of consciousness, if they need help or if they're doing okay. And the beautiful part of being more aware in the sessions is it's like you're trying on the clothes of your high self. So when you get out of the session and you get back into life and some crud hits your life, instead of spinning your wheels and being in fear and worry, you can settle yourself down, say, okay, now what do I need to know about this? And that voice or that knowing or that awareness that is always with you, is always there, will not override your free will, because that's part of our experience, will give you that information that you need. It's so easy. It's so close, and it's always with us. It's just being aware of it and knowing how to tap into it. And that's what I'm good at, I'm good with taking Dolores's great work and running with it and using talk and meditation and helping people find these answers that are right under the surface.
So let me ask you, with your experiences in past lives, first of all, can you talk to somebody who's listening right now who's like, this is a whole bunch of hooey? That's a technical term. This is ridiculous. Past lives. I don't even believe in reincarnation. Of course you go to hell if you do something bad. If someone is listening who's going through that kind of programming still in their mind, what would you say in regards to what you've experienced with your clients in this quote unquote past lives and what they've done? And were all of them Alexander the Great or Cleopatra, or we're all famous in our past lives? We can't just be cleaning up the poop behind Alexander the Great as he's walking on his horse. We're not that dude. We have to be Alexander the Great. But can you talk a little bit about what your experiences are with your clients in their past lives and what is being presented to them a little bit?
Yeah, so this is so fascinating. I always come to wherever their level is. I ask right off the bat, do you believe in past lives? Do you not? It's totally great. Either way, where are you at with this? And if they don't, then I say, okay, we're going to throw that past life word out of there because they're resistant to that. And I don't know. I mean, I'm a student of life. I'm learning as well that, I kind of think there's a strong possibility that this occurs. But for them, I'll say, let's just call it a story. A part of your mind is going to tell you a story that's going to be super helpful for you to understand this life that you're in and to answer your questions. Are you okay with that? And they mostly will do, yeah, I guess. I mean, life's been hard and I don't get it. And so let's try. Now, an example I can give you is, for some reason, for a while, I seemed to pull a lot of couples wanting to have this experience. So husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, two sisters, however it was. And out of the two, there almost always was one person that was totally into it. They read Dolores's books. They loved it. Let's just do it. And one was drug. And they, I don't want to do this. I don't get it. I haven't looked into it. I don't care about it, And that just in my own head, I'm just like, that's so brave, to come and, this is a big life-changing experience. It has the potential to be the best day of your life. So I really give a lot of kudos to those people. But when they are there, I just change how I talk about everything so that it feels more familiar to them and safe. And so, an example was I did a husband and a wife, and he was into it. She was not. And matter of fact, she was a little grumpy about being here. And I reminded her a couple times, we don't have to do this. Like, you don't have to do this at all. And she's like, no, he'll be disappointed if I don't do it. Let's just get this over with. Wow. I'm not saying this out loud. I'm just in my head. I'm like, wow, okay. And so I get done explaining to her what we're going to do and how this kind of works and how she helps herself through it, because I can't make anybody do this. This is completely up to them, how far and how deep we go with it. And I said, okay, so does all that information sound good to you? Are you okay with it? And she says, I just want you to know, I think this is all BS. And I'm like, okay, again, you don't have to do this. And she's like, no, we've made it this far. I wasted this much time. Let's just keep going.
It's a rough situation.
Yeah, I'm like, wow, okay, let's do it. And so I get her on the table, I begin it. 40 minutes in, and she's fighting me tooth and nail. And I'm like, come on, you can do this. And honestly, I have great patience with this, but even I got to the point where I've got one more question in me, and then I don't know what else to ask her. She's just not wanting to do this. And so I move her, to another place. I'm like, okay, what's the first thing that you see? And I'm waiting for nothing. I'm still here. And she goes, oh, I see stars and planets, and oh, I'm on a ship. And I'm sitting beside her, Alex, going, thank you, God.
Wow.
Was amazing. I have that one up on my YouTube channel. I've got quite a few sessions that clients have allowed me to put up. Hers is on there. It is flipping amazing. And it was so deep and so beautiful. And she had a lot of issues with the body. She healed everything. She has all the information to maintain the healing. And all of that came from her, not from me, which is, again, the empowering part. So yeah, I just kind of go to the level that the person's at, not high or low, but just where their belief system is,
Sure.
and help them work from there.
So from your perspective, from dealing with so many of your clients with past lives, why do we reincarnate? Why do we go through life after life after life of quote unquote pain and struggle and, lessons and, there's highs and there's lows. It just seems like I'm going to play devil's advocate. It could be a colossal waste of time. I don't want to go through pain. I don't want to. What is your perspective on that?
Okay, here's what I've gathered over many years is that not all life is bad or hard. That actually it's to be on Earth is one of the toughest places to be, this third dimension experience, because we have the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And in most places, they don't have that dichotomy. And in that scenario, we learn lessons much faster and deeper. And the feelings of those emotions, both high and low, are actually a beautiful gift. And that's what they'll talk about sometimes after a life, when we're kind of in that in-between space between lives, they'll talk about the emotions and, how much they treasured understanding the depth of the lows and the highest of the highs. It was an experience because in other lifetimes, they could be in other realms, other dimensions, other planets, where that experience is more of a neutrally type space. So that's very interesting. I think, of course, it's the opportunity to learn many different things because as a piece of source or God or whatever we call that, we want to know what everything is. So I've had clients that have been rocks or trees or animals, beautifully, highly evolved situations, just not the evolution that our current belief system supports. So I'm always learning. So I think, when I see a rock, I don't think, oh, it's just a nothing. It's, I like, go you.
At any of your sessions, did you ever hear something you just like, okay, I can't get on board with this. I can't. This is a rock. I can't. I'm sorry. Has there ever been a session like that for you, or are you just kind of just constantly learning and just accepting it?
Yeah, there are definite sessions where I am flying by the seat of my pants to grasp what's being said. There's actually somebody had brought to my attention a session that I put on YouTube. I was listening to it just real quick this morning, just a little bit of it. And it's a conversation with an 11th dimensional being. And that's what she went to in her session. And it was very, very high understanding. And it's where, I'm like, God, ask good questions, of this information that's so beyond me. And so I know I'm all in. I know without a doubt wherever the client goes is exactly where they need to go. And my job is just to ask the best questions on their behalf to get as much information as possible for them to get on their recording so they can hem and haw with it afterwards and learn and better themselves from it.
So to take that session as an example, when you're saying that she or the client had an 11th dimensional being come through, that sounds very channel-like, meaning that they're channeling a set. Now, is that them in another lifetime, in a current lifetime, which we can get into that in a second, or was it Bob in the 11th dimension. It's like, oh, Bob just wants to come in and give us some information.
Oh, it's so funny that you use the word Bob. That's a whole other story. But that's a 10th dimensional being. But okay, so 11th dimensional. Let's stay with that one. So in that experience, what we found out, I have never had a session like this before or after. What this 11th dimensional aspect of her, because we're all one, so it has to be a part of her to a degree, said that she's actually a 5th dimensional prototype that came into this life to kind of see how does it go with a 5th dimensional body being in a world that's still pretty much 3D. I'm going to tell you, it's been hard for her. It's very physically hard, lots of discomfort within her body, which is what she came into the session asking about and wanting help with. So, in a typical session, we'll do a body scan, and they're going through the, wherever in the body that needs to get repaired. And we're finding out great things like why they created it, because we all create our own stuff, what they've learned from it, how they're healing it, because if we can create it, we can heal it. So that's what goes on in the session. That's why people heal themselves, and what they need to change afterwards to maintain the healing, because it's our thoughts and our beliefs and our experiences typically that create the illness or the discomfort. So that's a normal one, right? For her, we had to go into an operating system of her 5th dimensional body. And so we had to shift gear. I had to shift gears and follow their lead to find this knowledge that was going to be beneficial to her afterwards. Everybody is unique, and every session is unique. So it's like that proverbial box of chocolates. You just don't know what you get till you get there.
Now, this idea that I've come across from speaking to so many different people on the show is that there technically is no such thing as a past life or a future life, that they're all happening at the same time, which always fries your brain.
Yes.
Can you explain in layman's terms to people how that is even possible, that everything's happening at the same time? And I use the word time very loosely, and how one life might affect another one, quote unquote, in the past or quote unquote in the future, depending on how we react in this life.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, I can.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah. It actually, my understanding of that initially came through in a talk message, asking to understand it better. And it was this beautiful understanding of that we're in this life. So you're Alex, I'm Suzanne. We're having our reality that we've created individually, and now we're converging, right? But, I, as a little girl, had parents that got divorced. But what they were telling me is I also created an aspect of me whose parents stayed together, and my soul could have that experience. And I, as a young adult, fell in love with somebody in Australia and went there and thought that was going to be the end all be all, and stayed there. But then another one had a big breakup and ended up coming back to the US and marrying somebody else. And so, Dolores would talk about this too. She's, same thing. Every time we make a decision, there's another aspect of us that breaks off or is created to have that experience. Perhaps we don't even break off. Perhaps it is all simultaneous. Our heads can wrap around going down a different path and having that experience. I don't know. I'm always learning. But I do believe that is correct, because it's a great understanding of deja vu, of, you go somewhere and it's like, oh my God, I've been here before. Or you meet somebody and like you instantly are in love with them, or you instantly can't stand them. And there's no reason either way for that. It's a recognition. So I think we are very, very, very multifaceted and much, much bigger than we've ever considered thinking about. And that's the all. And I get to visit that place every once in a while with my clients, and, and then go into journalistic mode and, ask questions about it. So it's an insatiable topic. Recently, you had Daryl Anka on, and he gave a really great understanding about that, about television channels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
very similar, very similar.
But well, you're sounding like it's not past lives or future lives; it's parallel realities, almost.
Yes, I would say that's closer to the truth.
Right. So it's almost like a parallel reality as opposed to a past life or future life. And from what I've heard from near-death experiencers who've had life reviews, they said, oh, when I'm going through a life review, not only am I feeling what the other person's feeling, but then I would figure out, oh, what if I dated Susie and got married with Susie? Oh, what would have happened if I got that job in New York and didn't take the job in Minnesota? And all of those are just, and you in the life review feel or experience how those played out, like those levels, if you will. It does sound, the more we talk about this, it just sounds like a giant video game. And you're like, okay, I wonder what would happen if I went down this road? What would happen if I went down this road and experienced, this and instead of as Mario, I'm going to play Donkey Kong this time, and I'll be Donkey Kong walking down that road. It sounds very video game-esque in many ways.
Then you get to the topic of a simulation,
which I've discussed a few times on the show, which is this whole simulation of the third dimension, which there's a simulation theories that we're all basically the Matrix. We're in the Matrix essentially. And that makes a whole lot of sense to me. Completely makes sense to me. And now quantum physics is starting to catch up to it. They're like, no, mathematically it's probable. I think the people who just won the Nobel Prize, the group of physicists, were basically because they proved that mathematically we can be in a simulation.
It's nice when they catch up,
to what we've been talking about, all the woo-woo stuff that they've been talking about for years.
Yeah. I had a beautiful opportunity once to work with an astrophysicist who was having severe health issues. And I actually flew to him because of his body not being able to fly to me. And I stayed with him and his wife, which gave me a very interesting view into his world that I don't normally get with my clients. But, here's this great mind, an amazing astrophysicist, very open to things, but within a scientific belief system. And one thing that made me kind of sad about that I understood better after meeting him was how important peer review is. And, you have to have that agreement, in order to validate what you find. And like to me, no, you just do you, you don't worry about what other people think about you. Those two worlds colliding, right? But, for him, let me think about this. We did several sessions because I was there with them. And the last session I gave to him, he went into the future. So if we're linear, into his next future lifetime. And he was a little boy and he was going to an academy for science. And he was kind of picking up the work from this lifetime and starting it again in that lifetime. And they had a very special guest that day in their classroom. It was an ET. And all the little guys were excited about, getting to meet an ET and all this. And the ET walks in and my client goes, whoa, he's like handsome. He looks like Clark Gable, very. And what we found out later was the ET made himself look very pleasing to the children so that they wouldn't scare them. Right. Mm-hmm. But the lesson that day was how to create consciousness. So the ET holds his hands out, and just above his hand, he creates this ball of consciousness, he calls it, and it's kind of orangey red color, and it's hovering above his hand. And he says, I just create this, and it is consciousness. And the fun of the class was he took that ball of consciousness and let each boy hold it in his hands, or it always hovered above. And he was talking to them about creating consciousness. Now, my client as a little boy in that life was the last one that got the experiment. And from my perspective, watching him in this deep space of hypnosis, having this experience, his eyes lit up. I mean, his eyes are closed, but his face lit up, and, he was so enamored with this new technology to him of understanding human consciousness, right? It was so amazing. And so in that way, I think it gave him the hope that where he felt like his life work wasn't appreciated in this life, which actually caused problems. I believe it was Parkinson's. He was almost not being able to walk at that point. He could see life goes on, and he recreates and learns new things. And that was like taking blinders off of him, that it's not all about this life. Everything plays into one another and it keeps building. And there is no time anyway. So, that's kind of an our world problem at the time.
Right. Time and space is an our world problem, without question. If through all your sessions, what is the farthest back anyone, quote unquote, back has anyone gone? Have they gone to Atlantis? Have they gone to Egypt? Have they gone to farther back to other times that we don't know?
Oh, okay. So yeah, the Egypt piece of cake happens often, not often, but, often enough that you get to explore it. Okay. Probably the coolest, farthest back one was before the Big Bang.
Wow.
And after the Big Bang. And this was a guy who in this life, he's actually created a government agency that we all know. And he did it out of, at the time, just the goodness of his heart to protect people. It's kind of gone wonky, of course, as all things do in government. But that was his creation in this life. He's retired. But in the lifetime he went to, it was very abstract and took a lot of questions and answers between the two of us to figure out what in the heck he was. But he was plasma, and the plasma kept folding in on itself and then folding in on itself and repeating and repeating. And then he realized he was folding over something. And he made the realization he was folding over a proton, and his role was to protect this proton. And then the Big Bang occurs, and that proton goes out, and it's creation. And so that was probably the earliest one.
Pretty early. Pretty early.
And bless his heart, as happens in just about all sessions, when he came out of it, I mean, he's like a deer in headlights, like, where did that come from? And I'm like, I know, isn't that awesome? Because you didn't expect to have that experience, but that's the experience that your high self picked for you to have, to understand this and this and that. We find it out. But
that's first fascinating. Did you have any clients that ever went back to places like Atlantis, or places that are more mythical in scope, but they have really clear ideas of what was going on during that time?
Oh yeah, there's one that comes to mind when you say that is Atlantis. There was a young lady that came to me for a session that was an architect in Atlantis and was very stoked about, the things that she was designing to make life better for people. But amongst all that, there were people that were designing things that were not better for people. And, that started, the understanding of the downfall of that. Lemuria is another one that people will visit. Egypt is a place that people, I think just in our day-to-day lives, a lot of people feel pulled to Egypt. They don't understand why, what's going on with that. They'll watch TV shows about, it's easier to find a show on Egypt than it is Atlantis for the most part, or Lemuria. I think that's changing. But that's why not long ago, I started doing taking tours to Egypt with the sole focus. One of three focuses is to help them discover their own lifetimes in Egypt while we're there amongst these great pyramids and temples, or the connection to the collective consciousness that just is all over the place there. so easy to tap into when you're physically there, and then guided, to have these self-discoveries is an amazing thing. But we all have it, we're all a part of the history. And it's not that hard to tap into it if you know how to and you're open to it.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions about this kind of work and also channeling in general that you would like to kind of like demystify for people?
Yeah. So I think, what you talked about earlier, everybody's Cleopatra, right?
Everyone's Alexander the Great or Cleopatra, or yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
So that can be truth. So what we found in this deep work is that there are things that are sometimes called imprints. A life can be an imprint. So say a young girl needs to come into a life and she's going to be a great natural born leader. It's going to be something she does from a young age, and she just has this gift, right? And so what we find out in sessions is, perhaps that soul has never had that experience. They have nothing to draw upon, but this is the lesson that they want to learn, or this is what's been decided. So their soul will get imprinted with, say, the lifetime of Cleopatra. And the way back in the soul's consciousness, that one can draw on those characteristics and those gifts and abilities. And what do you know? Like at fifth grade, they're like, groups of people are listening to what they're saying because it makes so much sense. And, it's the prodigies and the people that just have this innate ability or gift of whatever it is, having that. So sometimes in a session, I'll actually ask the high self, did they physically have this life, or is this an imprinted life? And it's usually an imprinted life. But to that soul with that imprint, it's just the same as it being their life. It's no different, which is, it gets into that, kind of mind-blowing emoji conversation again of we're all one. So yes, it's all possible. Now, some people get really, kind of their sweet little ego wrapped up around, I was Mary Magdalene. Let me tell you about my life as Mary Magdalene, and that's awesome. They can be drawing on that too, but I don't believe one person is the only. I've had many, many clients that have had lifetimes with Jesus, or famous people in history, and they're or as Jesus or as Mary, and it's great. It's something their aspect needed to experience to understand themselves deeper and better.
So when you say that, so let's use Jesus as an example. So that when you had a client that comes in that says, in the hypnosis comes out that, in this another life, I was Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain this imprint idea a little bit more? Because is it just more kind of like, there's a bunch of characters on the wall and you take off that suit and put it on to kind of experience what that character went through? I'm looking at it as an actor at this point. So it's like, Are you taking on the role because that role has these kind of elements that I want to learn about in that life, or it's messages that have to come in? I just want a little clarification if you can.
Yeah. I mean, you can use that analogy. It works really well with it. I think when those experiences happen in a session, it's something that it's an issue within their own life that they've struggled with understanding. And so to be shown that they were that, they have that connection to that, probably releases a lot of fear or worry or discomfort that they've carried in this life. I mean, this part of us that I'm calling the high self, it has any name, really is coming from a place of unconditional all love. It doesn't work in the constructs of fear. That's more of a left brain experience. And that's a duality thing that we agreed to have the fear and the unconditional love all wrapped up in the same life, to learn from. So I think in the instances of having a session where they're that showing that they are that person, that experience, it's to help them understand their own life, this current life, in a much deeper and profound way.
Got it. All right. Now, where do you think humanity's consciousness is going? And this great shift, this great awakening. Where do you think? Because if you watch the news, we're all going to hell right now, and the world's burning. I don't believe that, but many people do, because that's the messages that are being sent to them. So I always like to ask this question about this great awakening of consciousness that's happening. From your perspective, where do you think this is all going?
Well, from my perspective, I check in a lot with the high selves in sessions about, so how's it looking from your side? How are we doing? And really, I mean, the uniform answer that comes is we're right on track. Everything's fine. We're all experiencing what we need to experience. Now, we're in a really interesting place post-COVID that we're seeing everything. We're seeing where people are at very, very, very clearly. We don't wonder what their thoughts are. We don't wonder if they carry fear or if they've moved beyond it. And it's no judgment. It's zero judgment, because, those that are plugged into the TVs and, that's their kind of religion, what they base their life experience off of, for their soul, they need to have that experience. It's their reality. We're seeing many, many realities all at once now, right? From one extreme to the other, where we didn't see that a few years ago as clearly as we are now, if our eyes are open to it. And so what they tell me in sessions and what I get in talk messages is the more we're working on ourselves, the more we're helping the collective. And, I just have this very unique perspective into watching how things shift and change and the information that comes through in these sessions over all these years to get I think a nice grasp on it. So I'm very optimistic. I think there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen, and if that may not be pleasant or pretty, but we're all creating it so that we can learn from it. I believe what I've learned in sessions is the fear that we're creating in the outside world is because collectively we've decided to look at that ourselves and how we handle it. And so we create all these wonderful examples of fear, and it's the movie, it's the horror movie. Right. And then some of us are like going, I'm done with that. I don't need to experience that anymore. I'm going to, concentrate on the things that bring me joy and happiness and raise me and show me a better experience. And again, no judgment. That's just where some people are at. And so I have great patience, and but in the meantime, I'm doing everything I can to bring myself into a higher state of awareness and being.
Now I'm going to ask you a few questions. Ask all my guests. Okay. What is your definition of living a fulfilled life?
Following your heart, doing what brings you joy and happiness, being unconditionally loving, and allowing others to do what they need to do.
Now, if you had a chance to go back in time and speak to little Suzanne, what advice would you give her?
The advice I would give her is that there is so much more than what you can perceive, and you have all the knowledge within yourself, and trust your gut and your intuition at all times.
How do you define God or source?
I am.
And what is the ultimate purpose of life?
Love.
And where can people find out more about you and the amazing work you're doing in the world?
SuzanneSpooner.com for QHHT sessions to learn talk. AncientLifetimes.com if they want to come take a mind-blowing trip through Egypt with me. And my YouTube channel if they want to listen to amazing QHHT sessions that my clients have generously let me put out.
Awesome. And do you have any parting messages for the audience?
Yes, my parting message for your audience would be to trust your gut. And when something comes up in your mind, sit back and ask, how do you feel about it? And go with what feels right and good. Don't force yourself to do things that don't feel right, because it's usually not the best path.
Suzanne, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been enlightening, and I hope truly it helps people out there in the world. So thank you again for everything. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Alex.
Thanks for watching. Click on one of the videos below to continue your journey, and don't forget to subscribe.